Now listen here. When people think about war, they picture far-off countries, uniforms, and big flags. But West Virginia had a war of its own. Not with tanks, not with airplanes, but with rifles, dynamite, coal dust, and men who had nothing left to lose. This was the Mine Wars. And it wasn't just history. It was a mountain uprising. Back in the early 1900s, West Virginia was run by coal. And I don't mean coal like a job, I mean coal like a kingdom. Company towns sat deep in hollers, where the mountains boxed you in on every side. The coal company owned the houses. The coal company owned the store. The coal company owned the doctor. And in some places, they even owned the law. If you worked the mines, you didn't just work for the company, you lived inside it. And the deeper you got into that system, the harder it was to climb back out. Now here's where it gets crooked. A miner might work 12 hours underground, come out coughing black, and still not have real money. Because instead of dollars, some companies paid miners in scrip, company money. And that scrip could only be spent at one place, the company store. And them prices, Lord have mercy. They charge you like you was buying gold instead of flour. So miners stayed trapped, working just to survive, and surviving just to work. If a man tried to leave town, he'd find out quick that he owed the company more than he'd earned. Rent, food, tools, medicine, even the lamp on his helmet. And if your kid got sick, you didn't just worry about the fever. You worried about the bill. It wasn't just hard living. It was a cage built out of coal dust and debt. And if a man got tired of it, if he started talking union, the company had a solution. They'd hire mine guards, armed men. Some locals called them gun thugs. And one of the most feared outfits of all was the Baldwin-Felts Detective Agency. Now, don't let the word detective fool you. They weren't out solving mysteries. They were out breaking strikes. They guarded coal property. They watched miners like hawks. And if they suspected you of union talk, you might find yourself fired, or worse. These men weren't there to keep peace. They were there to keep control. And the miners knew it. Because in them hollers, the sound of boots on a porch wasn't always a visitor. Sometimes it was a warning. But you can only push a man so far before he pushes back. And miners started joining the United Mine Workers. They wanted fair pay. They wanted safer mines. They wanted a day where their children didn't have to crawl into darkness for a paycheck. And once the union idea hit the hollers, it spread like fire in dry leaves. But the coal companies didn't intend to give up control, not without a fight. In 1912, things exploded. Down in the Kanawha Valley, miners along Paint Creek and Cabin Creek went on strike. Now, this wasn't just a protest. This was a full-blown mountain conflict. The companies brought in guards. The miners armed themselves. And the whole valley turned into a battlefield. There were shootouts, ambushes, and violence that made the newspapers sound like they were reporting from a war zone. Because honestly, they were. The state government got involved. They declared martial law. That means the military steps in and regular law goes out the window. Men got arrested without trials. Union meetings got shut down. Miners got treated like criminals for simply wanting a fair life. But even that didn't stop the strike. If anything, it hardened the miners' hearts. And in 1913, the violence hit a peak. In a place once called Mucklow, now known as Gallagher, West Virginia, there was a deadly clash. Gunfire, chaos, men falling in the dirt. This moment became known as the Mucklow Massacre. Now, some folks argue over details, but what matters is this. It showed the whole state something plain. The coal companies were willing to spill blood to keep power, and the miners were willing to spill blood to take their lives back. Now you might wonder, why would men risk dying over coal? But you got to understand, this wasn't just about pay. This was about dignity, about being treated like a human being. When a mine collapse killed your cousin, and the company didn't even slow down production, it didn't feel like an accident. It felt like a message. You don't matter. And eventually the mountains answered back. Because men who are starving don't stay polite forever. Men who bury their friends don't stay quiet forever. And miners started realizing something powerful. If they didn't stand together, they'd fall one by one. And the companies counted on fear. But fear only works until a man gets mad enough to stop being scared. One of the most famous moments came in 1920. A small town called Matewan. Baldwin-Felts agents rolled in to evict Union miners from their homes. And standing against them was the town's police chief, Sid Hatfield. Now, Sid Hatfield wasn't some saint, but he had something rare in them days. He had a spine. A gunfight broke out right there in town, and it wasn't quick. Men dropped in the street, bullets hit windows, and Matewan became a symbol, a place where the coal company learned some towns weren't scared anymore. And word spread through the mountains fast. If Matewan could stand up, maybe everybody could. But coal power don't forget. Sid Hatfield was later shot down on courthouse steps, broad daylight, right in front of witnesses. And folks in the hollers saw that and said, well, that's it. Because if they could kill a lawman in public, they could kill anybody. And that anger rolled through the mountains like thunder. Then came the biggest clash of all, Blair Mountain. Over 10,000 miners marched with rifles and red bandanas around their necks. That bandana is where some folks say the term redneck came from. Not an insult, a symbol, a worker's badge, a sign you belong to the mountain army. And they marched to free miners being held under coal control. What happened next was unbelievable. Machine guns were used. Planes flew overhead, and some companies even dropped explosives. American citizens fighting American citizens on a West Virginia mountain ridge. It was one of the largest labor uprisings in U.S. history, and most folks today don't even know it happened. The battle lasted days. Men hid behind rocks and trees. Shots echoed through the fog, and the hills shook with the sound of rifles. It wasn't just chaos. It was organized anger. A whole workforce saying, "We ain't taking it no more." But eventually federal troops came in. And when miners saw U.S. soldiers, many laid down their weapons because they weren't trying to fight America. They were trying to survive it. The uprising ended. Many miners were arrested. Some were blacklisted. Some lost everything. But the mine wars planted a seed, a warning to the nation that if working people get squeezed too hard, they will rise up. Even in the hollers, even in the coal dust, even with nothing but courage and a rifle. And that's the truth of it. West Virginia wasn't just coal mines and mountain music. It was a place where the people fought back, where men who had nothing but sore hands and tired lungs stood up to power. So next time you drive through them ridges and you see an old tipple rusting or a coal camp road disappearing into the woods, just remember, those hills ain't quiet. They're full of history, and some of it still echoes. Because in West Virginia, the mountains don't forget, and neither do the miners.